sound as can be West, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare, as the sole heir to all my money, bonds, securities, estates, real and otherwise, my descendant, man or woman, who bears the surname of West.
Some Hollywood stars left their fortune to children, others left it to cats, ghosts, or even a cleaning crew for their mausoleum. These are the real, legally signed last wishes of people who never stopped performing, even from the grave. John Bowman's Dinner for Ghosts. Nobody in Cuttingsville, Vermont, knew what to make of the servants who kept laying out dinner every night in an empty mansion. Plates were filled, silverware polished, candles lit, then everything was cleared away untouched. The ritual never stopped. It went on for decades, paid for by a man who had been dead since 1891. That man was John Porter Bowman, a wealthy leather manufacturer who lost everything that mattered. His wife, Jenny, and both daughters died within a few years of each other. The grief broke him. Locals said he'd visit their graves daily and talk as if they might answer. When he built the grand Laurel Hall estate beside their mausoleum, people assumed it was just another monument to mourning. They didn't know what he had written into his will. Bowman left a trust of roughly $50,000, worth more than $1 million today, with very specific orders. His servants were to maintain the house, polish the silver, and serve dinner each evening in case his family returned. Every lamp had to stay lit, every bed freshly made. The estate's caretakers followed those directions exactly. For years, guests could walk past the windows at dusk and see the glow of candlelight over a silent table set for ghosts. The will also instructed that the property remain ready for the Bowmans' resurrection. He believed the family would come back together someday and would need their home to be perfect when they did. Locals began calling him the man who prepared for heaven at home. The trust kept paying out until the 1950s, long after Bowman's death, when the funds finally ran out. By then, the mansion had become a curiosity, a tourist stop for anyone who wanted to see how far love and grief could twist the meaning of wealth. Today, Laurel Hall still stands near the elaborate mausoleum he built across the road. Inside the stone tomb are the names of Jenny and the girls, with Bowman's crypt beside them. Visitors say that on quiet nights, you can almost picture the servants still setting that impossible dinner, faithfully keeping a promise their master wrote in ink more than a century ago. Marilyn Monroe's inherited icon. The day Marilyn Monroe's will was read, her friends realized she'd left behind more than diamonds and fame. She'd left a business empire no one could have predicted. Written just months before her death in 1962, the document split her estate in ways that stunned Hollywood. She left a small amount to her half-sister, Bernice Miracle, and a modest trust for her mother, Gladys. Her secretary and a few close friends received tokens of appreciation. But the surprise came when it was revealed that 75% of her estate would go to her acting coach, Lee Strasberg. Monroe adored him, believing he understood her better than anyone. She thought he'd use that inheritance to build a memorial library or preserve her artistic legacy. That didn't happen. After Strasberg's death in 1982, control passed to his widow, Anna Strasberg, a woman Monroe had never met. Suddenly, Anna held the rights to Marilyn's image, name, and personal belongings. She turned Monroe's estate into a global brand, licensing her likeness to cosmetics companies, fashion lines, and advertisements. Within a decade, the estate earned tens of millions. Monroe's close friends later said she never would have imagined her private belongings, her journals, dresses, and even her phone books being auctioned to the public. But every sale was legal, because the will gave the Strasbergs full control. The irony was bitter. Monroe, who spent her life trying to be taken seriously as an artist, posthumously became one of the most commercialized figures in Hollywood history. Her estate was even managed by branding agencies and lawyers specializing in celebrity image rights, something that didn't exist when she was alive. When Anna Strasberg finally sold the estate's rights in the early 2000s, the value of Marilyn Monroe had soared past $100 million. Nearly everything from her handwriting to her wardrobe became property that could be licensed or trademarked. Jack Benny's Endless Roses. When comedy legend Jack Benny passed away in December 1974, his fans mourned a man who had spent decades making America laugh. But one person continued receiving daily reminders that his love hadn't ended: his wife, Mary Livingston. Benny's will contained a single quiet instruction that surprised even his lawyers. It ordered that one long-stemmed red rose be delivered to Mary every day for the rest of her life. No explanations, no added sentiment, just that simple act. He'd arranged the payments in advance, ensuring she'd never miss a day. The florist who handled the order said she didn't believe it at first. Then the checks kept arriving, signed and verified by Benny's estate manager. The roses came like clockwork. Every morning, Mary's doorbell rang, and a florist handed her a single flower wrapped in paper. It became a ritual she cherished. Friends later said that each rose felt like Jack was still keeping a promise. The deliveries continued for nearly 9 years, right up until Mary's death in 1983. Even those who'd worked closely with Benny were stunned by the will's simplicity. There was no grand estate battle, no fight over royalties or collections. The only truly personal request in his will was that daily flower. Everything else, his money, properties, and rights, had been settled long before. After Mary's passing, the florist finally revealed the story to the press, calling it the most touching order we ever filled. The tale spread quickly, showing a side of Jack Benny that most fans never knew. Gene Roddenberry's Final Frontier. When Gene Roddenberry passed away in 1991, it seemed poetic that the man who invented Star Trek would leave behind a plan that reached beyond life itself. While most people choose burial or cremation, Roddenberry's will contained a clause that sounded like pure science fiction. A portion of his ashes would be sent into outer space. It wasn't a marketing stunt or fan tribute. It was a direct order from the visionary who had made space exploration feel human. Roddenberry had spent decades pushing audiences to imagine a future where humanity looked upward instead of inward. He believed curiosity was our greatest survival tool, and his own farewell reflected that belief. After his death, his wife, actress Majel Barrett, known to fans as Nurse Chapel and the voice of the Enterprise computer, took charge of making his last wish possible. In 1992, just a year later, part of Roddenberry's cremated remains flew aboard NASA's Space Shuttle Columbia as a symbolic memorial payload. The flight lasted only 9 days, but it made him the first human in history to have their remains sent into space. The gesture was small, yet it echoed around the world. Newspapers called it the final voyage of Star Trek's creator. NASA honored the request quietly but respectfully, knowing it was something only Roddenberry could have inspired. But that wasn't the end. In 1997, another capsule carrying a portion of his ashes launched aboard a Pegasus XL rocket on what became known as the Celestis Founders Flight. The rocket carried 24 people's cremated remains, including Roddenberry's and counterculture icon Timothy Leary's. The spacecraft orbited Earth for 6 years before re-entering the atmosphere and burning up in a spectacular descent. One last burst of light for the man who had imagined galaxies filled with possibility. Roddenberry's will also stated that Majel could one day join him. When she died in 2008, her remains were prepared for a future mission to take both of them even deeper into space. The Celestis Company confirmed plans for a memorial journey called the Enterprise Flight, designed to carry their ashes permanently beyond Earth's orbit. Fans loved every part of it. To them, it was the perfect ending, one that stayed true to the man who told humanity to boldly go where no one has gone before. Dusty Springfield's Spoiled Cat. By the time British soul singer Dusty Springfield died in 1999, her voice had already shaped a generation. But when lawyers read her will, they discovered her love life wasn't her final masterpiece. Her cat's was. Dusty's most unusual request didn't involve royalties or awards. It centered entirely on her beloved ragdoll cat, Nicholas. Her will read like a luxury pet manual. Nicholas was to live in comfort for the rest of his days, with an estate caretaker assigned to his full-time care. The cat's meals had to include imported baby food, and his bed had to be lined with Dusty's nightgown so he could sleep surrounded by her scent. Music wasn't optional either. Dusty ordered that her own albums be played for Nicholas every night at bedtime. Friends said the cat had always been spoiled. He traveled with her, slept in her bed, and once even had his own passport photo for flights. But the will turned affection into a legal mandate. Every instruction had to be followed exactly. The estate executor was responsible for enforcing it, and the funds to maintain Nicholas's lifestyle were locked in through a pet trust, perfectly legal under UK law. Dusty's flair for drama even extended to Nicholas's social life. She included a note suggesting that Nicholas marry her friend's female cat, although that part was clearly symbolic. It was her way of ensuring her beloved pet wouldn't be lonely once she was gone. The press had a field day with it. Headlines called Nicholas the richest cat in Britain, though the exact amount left for him was never disclosed. What's certain is that Springfield's instructions were followed in full. Her executor confirmed that Nicholas lived comfortably for several more years, cared for exactly as his famous owner had demanded. When fans heard about the will, many said it made perfect sense. Dusty had always been known for her perfectionism and her emotional intensity. Every song, every outfit, every studio session was crafted down to the smallest detail. Why should her afterlife plans be any different? In the end, Dusty Springfield's will turned a pampered pet into a minor celebrity and left lawyers shaking their heads in disbelief. Nicholas may never have understood how famous he'd become, but he certainly lived like the sole queen's favorite heir by court order. Leona Helmsley's Millionaire Maltese. When hotel billionaire Leona Helmsley died in 2007, her reputation as the Queen of Mean was already legendary, but her will managed to shock even those who thought they'd seen it all. Out of an estate worth billions, Helmsley left $12 million to her dog, a fluffy white Maltese named Trouble. Her relatives didn't take it well. Some were cut out completely, others received only small allowances, while Trouble was suddenly one of the richest pets in the world. Helmsley's will also instructed that her mausoleum be steam cleaned once a year, with $3 million set aside for maintenance. The combination of pettiness and extravagance turned her final act into a tabloid sensation. Trouble's life after her owner's death became the stuff of legal legend. Under New York's pet trust laws, a caretaker was appointed to manage the dog's fortune. It wasn't just for toys and food. The dog had her own security team after death threats arrived by mail. Her annual expenses were later detailed in court filings: $100,000 for full-time security, $8,000 for grooming, $1,200 for food, and $60,000 for her caretaker's salary. The will's more extreme clauses didn't survive. In 2008, a Manhattan judge ruled that $12 million was excessive for the reasonable care of a dog, cutting it down to $2 million and distributing the rest to Helmsley's charitable foundation and disinherited grandchildren. Still, even with the reduction, Trouble lived out her life in luxury at a Florida resort, eating gourmet meals and traveling in private jets. After Trouble's death in 2011, her caretaker quietly arranged for her cremation, though state law barred the dog from being buried beside Helmsley. The mausoleum, however, continues to be cleaned exactly as the will demanded, funded by the trust that survived every court appeal. For estate planners, the Helmsley case became a landmark example of how far last wishes can legally stretch. Philip Seymour Hoffman's antitrust fund will. When Philip Seymour Hoffman died in 2014, his will revealed something rare in Hollywood: an open rejection of wealth's safety net. The Oscar-winning actor left behind an estate worth more than $35 million, yet almost none of it went directly to his 3 children. Instead, he left nearly everything to his longtime partner, Mimi O'Donnell, explaining that he didn't want his kids turning into what he called trust fund children. The will, written in 2004 and updated after the birth of his first child, laid out Hoffman's thinking in plain terms. He wanted his children to live in normal environments and experience everyday life, not grow up surrounded by Hollywood privilege. He even suggested they be raised in or near Manhattan, Chicago, or San Francisco, cities he considered grounded and culturally rich, far from the entertainment bubble that made him famous. Court documents showed that Hoffman rejected the idea of splitting his estate among his children because he trusted O'Donnell to provide for them naturally, without turning money into a measure of love. His accountant and lawyers later testified that he had repeatedly refused to set up a trust despite professional advice to do so. The decision sparked public debate. Some praised him for wanting to keep his children humble. Others criticized the move, noting that it created a large tax burden for O'Donnell and complicated the estate's long-term structure. Still, Hoffman's reasoning was clear. He wanted his kids to learn purpose through work, not inheritance. After his death, O'Donnell continued raising their children in New York, honoring the wishes he'd written a decade earlier. There were no lavish trust announcements, no family reality shows, no celebrity endorsements. Just a mother keeping life steady for 3 kids who had already lost too much. Hoffman's will wasn't flashy, but it was deeply human. It stripped away the show business gloss and left behind something simple, a father's hope that his children would build their own lives. In a city where fame and fortune usually define legacy, his final act was to say no to both. David Bowie's Bali farewell. David Bowie planned everything, even his exit. When he passed away in January 2016, his will, written in 2004, showed the same precision that shaped his music. It instructed that his body be cremated in Bali, in accordance with Buddhist rituals. If that wasn't possible, his ashes were still to be scattered there. Bowie had visited Bali in the 1980s and became fascinated by its temples and sense of spiritual calm. He wasn't interested in traditional celebrity, funerals, or monuments. Since it wasn't practical to transport his body overseas, Bowie was cremated in New Jersey 2 days after his death, in complete privacy. A few close friends attended, but the details were kept secret for weeks. Later, his ashes were flown to Bali and scattered in a discreet ceremony that followed local customs. Even in death, Bowie controlled the narrative, mystery intact. The will also laid out how his fortune, estimated around $100 million, would be divided. Half went to his wife, model Eamon, while the other half was split between his 2 children, Duncan Jones, his son from his first marriage, and Alexandria Zara Jones, his daughter with Eamon. Alexandria's share was placed in trust until her 18th birthday, a thoughtful safeguard Bowie added himself. Friends said Bowie had talked often about wanting to leave quietly, with dignity. He didn't want headlines or a global mourning event. Still, his death sparked both. Fans around the world built spontaneous memorials, blasting his final album, Black Star, which had been released just 2 days before he died. The record turned out to be his farewell message, filled with hints about his illness, mortality, and acceptance. Even the lawyers who handled his estate called it one of the simplest wills we've seen from someone so famous. There were no disputes, no contested assets, just precise instructions followed exactly as written. Bowie once said he didn't believe in heaven or hell, only energy that transforms and moves on. Carrie Fisher's Star Wars keepsake. She always handled fame with humor, so when she passed away in December 2016, no one expected her will to be sentimental or grand. It was perfectly, unmistakably Carrie, equal parts wit, honesty, and rebellion. Among her many personal effects, one item stood out, her life-size Prozac pill urn. The urn had been sitting in her home for years. Shaped like an enormous capsule of the antidepressant she often joked had kept her sane enough to misbehave. Fisher had been open about her bipolar disorder and addiction struggles, turning them into comedy rather than shame. The urn was her tongue-in-cheek reminder that laughter could survive anything. After her death, her family followed her wishes closely. Her daughter, actress Billie Lourd, inherited her estate, which included the urn, Fisher's Beverly Hills home, and all publishing rights to her books and scripts. But when Fisher was cremated, her ashes were placed inside that same giant pill, exactly as she'd wanted. At her joint memorial with her mother, Debbie Reynolds, Lourd carried it herself. Fans watching news footage thought it was a joke until Fisher's brother confirmed, "It's what Carrie wanted. She would have loved this." The will also detailed that Fisher's literary estate, including postcards from The Edge and her journals, be managed under Lourd's supervision. She wanted her daughter to decide how and when her unpublished writing would be shared. For someone who had lived her life in public, Fisher's will made privacy her final act of control. It wasn't a complicated document. Most of her assets went straight to Billie, with smaller bequests to close friends and charitable causes supporting mental health research. What made it remarkable was tone. It sounded like Carrie talking, full of self-awareness and dry humor. Even in death, she made headlines by turning pain into performance. Reporters described her funeral as part heartbreak, part stand-up routine. The Prozac urn became an instant symbol of how Fisher wanted to be remembered, unfiltered, unapologetic, and still making people laugh. She had once said, "Take your broken heart, make it into art." Her will followed that advice word for word. Aretha Franklin's hidden handwritten wills. When Aretha Franklin died in 2018, everyone assumed the Queen of Soul hadn't left a will. Her 4 sons were told her estate, worth around $80 million, would go through Michigan's standard probate process. Then, 9 months later, everything changed. While cleaning her suburban Detroit home, Franklin's niece made a shocking discovery. 2 handwritten wills stuffed inside notebooks, one found in a locked cabinet, another hidden under couch cushions. Each was signed by Aretha, but they didn't match. One was dated 2010, the other 2014, and both divided her property, music rights, and royalties in completely different ways. The notes weren't formal documents. They were scribbled in pen, full of crossouts and arrows, but both met Michigan's legal definition of a valid holographic will as long as handwriting and signatures could be verified. What followed was a courtroom battle that played out like a modern-day soul opera. 2 of her sons, Kickaff and Edward Franklin, supported the 2014 version. Her eldest, Clarence, had his own separate arrangements for care due to health issues. But her son, Ted White II, insisted the 2010 will was the valid one, claiming it had been written more carefully and stored securely. The fight centered on one question: which document represented Aretha's true intent? The 2014 will favored Kickaff, giving him Franklin's primary residence in Bloomfield Hills and control of certain royalties. The older one divided assets more evenly. Family tensions spilled into public view, with handwritten pages displayed in court like sacred relics. In 2023, after years of legal wrangling, a Michigan jury took less than an hour to decide. The 2014 couch cushion will was valid. That meant Aretha's most recent handwritten note, creased, messy, and signed with a smiley face, became the controlling document for one of music's greatest fortunes. The ruling made legal history. It showed that in Michigan, a signature scrawled on notebook paper could outweigh years of estate planning. Lawyers called it a wake-up call for every celebrity with no formal will. Aretha Franklin's songs had always been about power, independence, and truth. Even her final papers carried that spirit, written by hand, hidden in plain sight, and fought over until her last word stood as law. Not every lie in Hollywood was whispered. Some were typed, notarized, and filed. These death certificates don't just record a date, they reveal everything no one dared say out loud. The heart failure wasn't natural. Jean Harlow was one of MGM's biggest stars in the 1930s, but her death certificate left more questions than answers. It said acute nephritis, a vague term for kidney failure. What it didn't say was how fast she declined and how badly things were handled behind the scenes. She collapsed on set in May 1937. At first, doctors blamed it on the flu. Then it was gallbladder trouble. She was swollen, couldn't keep food down, and her breath smelled like ammonia, an obvious sign of kidney issues. Still, no one got her to a specialist. MGM reportedly didn't want bad press. They downplayed her condition. By the time she was finally hospitalized, it was too late. Her kidneys were shutting down and fluid was flooding her lungs. She passed away just days later. The official record listed heart failure and uremia caused by nephritis, but experts later said her symptoms fit a treatable infection. She didn't need to die at 26. Stomach lined with acid burns. Thelma Todd was found slumped in her car, parked inside a garage near Pacific Palisades. The official cause: carbon monoxide poisoning. But the death certificate included something the headlines missed: damage to her stomach lining from acid exposure. Todd had spent the weekend partying. Witnesses said she seemed fine when she left, but hours later, her body was discovered. The garage belonged to her ex's wife, which fueled rumors. Some suspected foul play. Others pointed to accidental death after falling asleep with the engine running. No alcohol was found in her system, no bruises, just the gas and the acid. The certificate listed accidental death, but multiple doctors questioned why a healthy woman would sit in a running car, fully dressed, in freezing weather. And where did the acid come from? Bruising hours before overdose. Carol Landis was found unresponsive in her Brentwood home. The cause on the certificate, overdose, but the full report noted something unusual: faint bruising on both wrists and upper arms. No one could explain it. She had just spent the evening with actor Rex Harrison, who was married at the time. Landis reportedly begged him not to leave her. After he went home, she wrote several notes, only one of which made it to police. The others disappeared. The official story said she took sleeping pills late that night, but her certificate recorded lividity and rigor that didn't match the timeline. Some believe Harrison waited hours before calling for help. The bruises weren't deep, but they were fresh. The coroner couldn't say if they were defensive or accidental. Either way, they weren't consistent with someone just lying down and going to sleep. Liver weighed almost double. Ernie Kovacs died in a car crash. He lost control of his Chevy Corvair in the rain and slammed into a utility pole. The crash was instant, but his death certificate included something unrelated to the accident. His liver was massively enlarged, nearly double the normal size. The report listed cirrhosis suspected, which suggested years of heavy alcohol use. Friends later admitted he drank daily, often on set, but no one had talked about long-term damage until that form came out. His widow, Edie Adams, insisted alcohol played no part in the crash. Toxicology showed no drugs or alcohol in his system at the time of death, but the liver condition revealed a deeper issue. He had been hiding serious health problems, even from those closest to him. There was no foul play, no scandal, just a one-car wreck in the rain. But that one line on the certificate, chronic liver disease, noted, quietly changed how people saw him. 3rd degree, burns after crash. Jane Mansfield died instantly when her car slammed into the rear of a slowed tractor trailer outside New Orleans. The top of the vehicle was sheared off, killing all 3 adults in the front seat. Her children, asleep in the back, survived with minor injuries. Early news reports claimed she'd been decapitated. That wasn't true. The coroner later clarified the cause of death as crushed skull with severe brain trauma. Her head injuries were catastrophic but not surgical separation. A wig was found yards from the crash site, which likely fueled the false rumors. The press ran with it, but the official report stayed clear. She suffered multiple skull fractures, massive facial trauma, and instant loss of life. There were no burns, no fire, and no explosion. Just the full force of a steel truck hitting a low-sitting car at highway speed. The accident also prompted a nationwide push for truck underride guards, the safety bars now common on trailers. Morphine level off the charts? Judy Garland's death certificate listed barbiturate overdose, but the toxicology notes told a deeper story. The morphine level in her blood was higher than the known fatal range. Her body had built such a high tolerance, it blurred the line between survival and collapse. She had a long history of pill use, first given stimulants as a teenager by the studio. Over time, she needed more to sleep, more to wake up, more to get through a day. Her house in London was quiet that morning when her husband found her. Too quiet. The coroner said the overdose wasn't deliberate. Her liver and kidneys were already struggling, and the medication just pushed them over the edge. The certificate noted chronic malnutrition and organ stress, not surprising for someone who had lived on pills and cigarettes for years. There were no signs of trauma or foul play, just a woman whose system couldn't take it anymore. She was 4'11", barely 90 pounds, and her organs were giving out. Overdose from potent heroin batch. Janis Joplin was found face down on the floor of her Los Angeles hotel room, a cigarette still in her hand. The death certificate confirmed the cause, heroin overdose, with alcohol playing a supporting role. She was just 27. Another addition to the now famous 27 Club. There was no note, no staged farewell. Her friends said she seemed upbeat the night before, but they also said the heroin in circulation that week was unusually potent. Several others in her circle overdosed around the same time. Her room showed no signs of struggle. An open pack of cigarettes, change on the nightstand, and a cap from a syringe. That's it. No one heard a thing. By the time she was found, it was too late. Toxicology confirmed the drugs in her system were strong enough to stop her heart in minutes. Her liver and heart showed signs of long-term stress, likely from constant use and alcohol. There were rumors, theories, and fan speculation, but the paperwork was simple and final. Joplin didn't plan it. She didn't see it coming. The dose was just too much, and no one was there to catch it in time. Fatal brain swelling from painkiller. Bruce Lee collapsed suddenly while at a colleague's apartment in Hong Kong. The official cause of death, listed on his certificate, was cerebral edema, severe brain swelling. What triggered it was a common prescription drug, Equagesic, a mix of aspirin and a tranquilizer. Just 2 months earlier, Lee had collapsed in a recording studio. Doctors said it was likely heat stroke or a bad reaction to pain meds. He recovered fast, but on the day he died, he complained of a headache and took a single Equagesic tablet. He never woke up. The coroner found no alcohol or recreational drugs in his system, but the reaction to the medication was so extreme, it caused the brain to swell rapidly. His earlier episode should have been a warning. Instead, it was dismissed. Heart was nearly double-sized. Elvis Presley's death certificate said he died of a heart attack. What the final medical examiner's notes revealed was more severe. His heart weighed over 500 grams. That's nearly twice the normal size. Found face down in the bathroom at Graceland, Elvis had been battling multiple health issues. The certificate pointed to cardiac arrhythmia, but the details added up to something bigger. His body showed signs of chronic constipation, liver damage, and nerve issues. The heart enlargement stood out. It was proof his system had been under pressure for years. Toxicology found 14 different substances in his blood, all prescriptions, some meant for sleep, others for digestion or pain. He wasn't over the limit on any single drug, but together they overwhelmed him. The heart simply couldn't keep up. The report also noted excessive fluid in his lungs and swelling in his colon, symptoms missed during routine checkups. He hadn't looked well in years, but few knew how far gone he was. Brain shrinking from alcohol use. Truman Capote's death certificate listed liver disease as the primary cause, but the final report also noted brain atrophy. His brain had started shrinking. That detail never made the headlines, but it explained everything. Capote had long battled addiction. Alcohol and pills were his daily routine in his final years. His speech had become slurred, his memory unreliable. By the time of his death, friends barely recognized him. He died in a guest bedroom at a friend's house in Los Angeles. The death certificate cited liver failure complicated by phlebitis and multiple drug intoxication. But the coroner included a quiet note, signs of central nervous system decline consistent with long-term substance use. In plain terms, his brain was deteriorating. There was no single overdose, no drama, just a body shutting down piece by piece. The shrinking brain explained his erratic behavior, confusion, and emotional swings. It was the kind of detail most people miss, but it said everything about what those last years were really like. Blunt trauma before drowning. Carol Wayne was best known for her bubbly roles on late-night television. She vanished during a trip to Mexico. Days later, her body was found face down in shallow water. The death certificate said probable drowning, but the autopsy listed something else: blunt trauma to the head and abdomen. She had been vacationing with a man she'd argued with earlier that week. According to him, she went for a walk alone and never came back. But the coroner noted bruises inconsistent with a fall or accidental slip. No alcohol or drugs were found in her system. The Mexican authorities closed the case quickly. No foul play was listed, no follow-up was done. The report left open the possibility of an accident, but the injuries raised doubts. Her passport, jewelry, and luggage were all still in the hotel. The certificate didn't tell the full story, but it showed more than what the press reported at the time. Survived, but not really. Dominique Dunn was in a coma for 5 days. That part's rarely mentioned. The coroner's report confirmed she had brain activity at first. Machines kept her breathing while her family waited. Her certificate lists the final cause, traumatic asphyxia, but the timeline made it more tragic. She had been attacked in her driveway by her ex-boyfriend. Neighbors heard her scream. By the time paramedics arrived, she had lost consciousness, but she didn't die on the spot. She lingered, and the hospital documented it: all seizures, swelling, brain hemorrhage. Her injuries were brutal. The autopsy noted fractures around the neck and deep bruising, but the certificate emphasized something else: respiratory arrest due to external pressure. Clinical, but clear. Her family eventually removed life support. That's when the certificate was finalized. The delay made headlines, but the official record captured the quiet suffering in between. Unusual toxicology. No clear answers. David Keredine was found in a Bangkok hotel closet, partially suspended by cords. The death certificate listed asphyxiation. The circumstances were unusual, and the official investigation left more questions than clarity. There were no signs of forced entry, no alcohol or illegal drugs in his system. Thai authorities ruled it an accident. The exact mechanism wasn't publicly detailed, and no charges were filed. Some reports suggested the manner of death was self-inflicted, but the family disputed those claims. The LAPD opened a review at the family's request, though they had no authority abroad. Keredine's family ordered a private autopsy in the U.S., but the results were never released in full. There were rumors about chemical traces and missed forensic details, but no confirmed evidence was made public. Keredine had a long acting career and was in Bangkok filming a new movie. He'd last been seen the night before at dinner with producers. Lethal mix of prescribed sedatives. Heath Ledger was found face down in bed at his New York apartment. The death certificate listed acute intoxication from a mix of prescription medications. None were illegal, but together, they slowed his body down until it couldn't recover. Toxicology showed 6 medications in his system, 2 painkillers, 2 anti-anxiety drugs, a sleeping aid, and an antihistamine. Each drug was within legal limits, but the combination was lethal. The sedatives depressed his breathing, leading to oxygen loss and eventual heart failure. There were no signs of trauma, and no note was left behind. His house was quiet, his bed undisturbed. He had been battling insomnia and anxiety for months. Doctors had prescribed the drugs separately, but no one tracked how they would interact in his body. The coroner ruled the death accidental. He didn't take too much of one thing, he took just enough of everything to make recovery impossible. His breathing slowed while he slept, and no one noticed until it was too late. Organs too decayed to test. Brittany Murphy's death was ruled as pneumonia with secondary anemia and multiple drug intoxication, but the report included a line that raised eyebrows. Several of her organs were too decayed to test properly. That wasn't due to delay. It happened fast, within hours of death. She collapsed in her bathroom and was pronounced dead at the hospital. Her husband claimed she had flu-like symptoms for days. The coroner found dozens of medications in her system, mostly over-the-counter drugs. No illegal substances, no high-dose narcotics. What shocked investigators wasn't the toxicology, it was the rapid breakdown of tissue. Her organs had started to rot unusually fast. That led to speculation about mold in her home or environmental toxins. Nothing conclusive was ever found. Her father later called for further testing. The LA County coroner said no foul play was involved. Still, the organ decay made it difficult to get a clear answer. When her husband died just 5 months later under similar conditions, the questions grew. The report stayed the same, natural causes, but the body had deteriorated so quickly that some answers died with her. Severe nasal collapse noted. Michael Jackson's death certificate cited acute propofol intoxication, but deeper in the autopsy were findings related to years of surgeries, most notably severe nasal collapse. The structure of his nose had weakened to the point that breathing through it was limited. One nostril was nearly closed off. His personal doctor had administered the surgical anesthetic to help him sleep. Combined with other sedatives, it stopped his breathing. But the report also included physical signs of long-term strain, scarring from multiple operations, adhesive residue from prosthetic support, and thinning cartilage. These weren't the cause of death, but they helped explain his overall condition. His lungs were inflamed, his skin showed signs of vitiligo, and his weight had dropped below 140 pounds. The nasal collapse was one of many stress points his body had endured quietly for years. Jackson's team tried to control the narrative, but the certificate listed not only the overdose, but also contributing conditions chronic insomnia, multiple medical dependencies, and respiratory restriction from past surgeries. Prescription bottles with labels removed. Whitney Houston was found unresponsive in a Beverly Hilton bathtub. Her death certificate listed drowning, with heart disease and drug use as contributing factors. But the investigators' notes included a strange detail. Several pill bottles in her room had missing or scratched-off labels. The coroner found a mix of prescription medications, anxiety pills, muscle relaxers, and antihistamines. None were in illegal quantities. But the altered bottle suggested someone didn't want the exact sources identified. That part was never explained. Toxicology showed she had used cocaine recently, but the levels weren't considered fatal. What likely happened was a sudden cardiac event, followed by unconsciousness and slipping beneath the water. The bathwater was shallow, but she never came up. Her body also had minor abrasions on her forehead, nose, and upper lip. The report said they may have come from contact with the tub during the fall. The combination of prescription drugs and a weakened heart proved too much, but the missing labels added a layer of mystery. Advanced decay hours after death. Philip Seymour Hoffman was found in his New York apartment with a syringe still in his arm. The death certificate cited acute mixed drug intoxication. But the medical notes described something surprising. His body showed signs of advanced decomposition far earlier than expected. The coroner noted full postmortem lividity, body stiffness, and skin changes that usually take longer to appear. It suggested he had been gone for many hours before discovery, maybe even the entire night. Inside his apartment, police found nearly 70 bags of heroin, many unopened. Several prescription drugs were also on the scene. The combination had overwhelmed his nervous system quickly, but the state of his body hinted that no one had checked on him for some time. Friends thought he'd been clean. He had just finished rehab. The advanced decay made the timeline difficult to piece together. No one heard anything. No neighbors reported noise. The scene was silent and stayed that way for hours. Chest burns from emergency shocks. Carrie Fisher's death certificate listed sleep apnea and other undetermined factors. But the full report revealed burn marks across her chest, residue from emergency defibrillator paddles used mid-flight. Fisher had gone into cardiac arrest on a plane from London to Los Angeles. Passengers reported she stopped breathing just before landing. Paramedics rushed on board and began CPR immediately. The burns came from repeated shocks to restart her heart. They didn't work. Toxicology later found multiple substances in her system. The mix wasn't high enough to name a single cause. The coroner wrote that while drug use likely contributed, the exact trigger couldn't be confirmed. What stood out were the efforts to save her. The burns were deep enough to be noted in the report, showing how hard responders tried. She was on a ventilator for days before she passed. The official file didn't blame the substances alone. It pointed to long-standing health problems, sleep apnea, and a weakened heart. Stroke struck hours after collapse. Debbie Reynolds passed away just one day after her daughter, Carrie Fisher. Her death certificate listed intracerebral hemorrhage, a massive stroke caused by bleeding in the brain. It was sudden, and it hit hard. She collapsed at her son Todd's home while discussing funeral arrangements for Carrie. Paramedics arrived quickly, but her condition was already deteriorating. She was rushed to the hospital, where doctors couldn't reverse the damage. Though no autopsy was publicly released, it was confirmed that she had a history of high blood pressure, a major risk factor for strokes in older adults. She had no recent major illnesses, and her death caught many by surprise. Some sources mentioned possible complications during the collapse, including breathing difficulties. But the cause was clear: a catastrophic brain event brought on by long-term vascular strain and possibly worsened by the emotional stress of losing her daughter. The timing was heartbreaking. 2 icons, gone within 36 hours. Her death certificate made no mention of grief, but everyone close to her believed it played a role. Bela Lugosi, Dracula's final costume. Bela Lugosi spent his career haunted by Dracula, so much so that when he died in 1956, he was buried wearing the infamous cape. But that wasn't the strangest part of his death. The actor's cause of death was listed as a heart attack, technically coronary occlusion, at the age of 73. By that time, Hollywood had long since moved on from him. His health had been declining for years, worsened by chronic pain and an addiction to morphine and methadone. He died nearly penniless in a modest Los Angeles apartment. Despite once being a major horror star, the Dracula legend hadn't been kind to him in his later years. The roles dried up. The money disappeared. By the time of his death, he was more of a Hollywood relic than a legend. But the real horror began after he was gone. Lugosi never publicly stated he wanted to be buried in his Dracula costume, yet when the funeral was arranged, that's exactly what happened. His son, Bela Lugosi Jr., later insisted this wasn't his father's wish. It was a decision made by his ex-wife, Lillian, along with actor Vincent Price. The intention was to honor his most famous role, but did Lugosi himself ever want to spend eternity trapped in the cape that defined and cursed his career? That part remains murky. Then there was the issue of the funeral itself. Lugosi had no money left. He died in near destitution, living off Social Security and occasional film work when he could get it. He didn't even have enough funds to pay for his own burial. That's when a fellow horror icon stepped in. Peter Lorre, along with Vincent Price, covered the funeral costs to give their friend a proper send-off. There's even a legend that Lorre, upon seeing Lugosi in the open casket wearing the cape, leaned over to Vincent Price and whispered, "Do you think we should drive a stake through his heart, just to be safe?" Jane Mansfield, the car wreck. June 29, 1967. A Buick Electra sped down a dark Louisiana highway, slicing through the humid night air. Inside sat Jane Mansfield, her attorney and rumored boyfriend Sam Brody, their driver, and 3 children, including 3-year-old Mariska Hargitay, nestled in the back seat. The group was en route from Biloxi, Mississippi, where Mansfield had performed at a nightclub, heading toward New Orleans for her next booking. But at approximately 2:25 a.m., the trip ended in one of Hollywood's most infamous car crashes. The Buick was traveling at high speed when it slammed into the back of a tractor-trailer that had slowed for a mosquito fogging truck. The impact was instant and catastrophic. The top of the car crumpled as it slid under the truck, shearing off the windshield and part of the roof. The first reports were gruesome. Word spread that Mansfield had been decapitated. While that wasn't exactly true, the truth wasn't much better. Her official autopsy listed the cause of death as crushed skull with avulsion of cranium and brain. Put simply, the force of the crash had violently scalped her, exposing her skull. Brain matter was found on the car's dashboard. The coroner noted she suffered crushed skull with separation at the temporal region, meaning her head had taken the full brunt of the impact. Death was immediate. Her attorney Brody and the driver, Ronnie Harrison, also died on impact. Amazingly, Mansfield's 3 children survived, shielded by the front seat. Mariska Hargitay, who would later become famous for her role in Law and Order, SVU, was left with a facial scar but no memory of the accident. Thelma Todd, poisoned in her own garage. On the morning of December 16, 1935, Thelma Todd's maid found her slumped in the driver's seat of her Lincoln convertible, parked inside her garage in Pacific Palisades. The 29-year-old actress, best known for her comedic roles alongside the Marx Brothers, was dead from carbon monoxide poisoning. But the details of her final night didn't sit right with investigators or the public. The official cause of death? Accidental. The theory? She came home late from a party, too drunk to make it inside, and passed out in her car while the engine ran. But that explanation ignored several red flags. For starters, Todd's body didn't look like she had simply fallen asleep. She was still wearing her evening gown, makeup intact, and had fresh bruises on her throat. Blood was found on her lips and inside her mouth, suggesting she had suffered some kind of trauma before she died. Even stranger, her car keys weren't in the ignition. They were tucked inside her purse. If she had locked herself inside the garage, how did the keys end up there? Then there was the matter of her powerful enemies. Todd owned Thelma Todd's Sidewalk Cafe, a successful restaurant in Malibu. According to rumors, mobster Lucky Luciano pressured her to let him run an illegal gambling operation out of her restaurant. She refused. A few days later, she was dead. The night before she died, Todd attended a party at the Trocadero nightclub. She seemed in good spirits, even joking with friends about recent death threats she had received. She left the club around 2 a.m., reportedly driven home by her chauffeur, but instead of entering her house, She somehow ended up in the garage of her ex-husband, Pat DiCicco, a known mob associate, where she died. The autopsy confirmed carbon monoxide poisoning but found no alcohol in her system, contradicting the theory that she had passed out drunk. There were no signs of a struggle, yet the bruises on her body raised suspicions. Some believed she was forced into the garage and locked inside, left to suffocate. Others suspected she had been murdered elsewhere, and the scene was staged. Despite the inconsistencies, the case was closed. No one was ever charged. James Dean. The autopsy proved no instant death. He wasn't just a Hollywood actor. He was an icon of rebellion, speed, and recklessness. But on September 30th, 1955, the ride ended when his Porsche 550 Spider, nicknamed the Little Bastard, collided with another vehicle at the intersection of Route 466, now State Route 46, and Route 41 in Cholame, California. The official cause of death: multiple traumatic injuries. The autopsy told a far grimmer story. Dean was behind the wheel, his passenger and mechanic, Rolf Wütherich, in the seat next to him. A Ford Tudor, driven by 23-year-old Donald Turnipseed, turned in front of them. Dean, going roughly 85 miles per hour, had no time to react. The impact crushed the tiny Porsche, hurling Dean's body halfway out of the wreckage. The autopsy report detailed the extensive damage: a fractured skull, broken neck, crushed ribs, and massive internal injuries. His left foot was nearly severed, but the most unsettling detail: he wasn't immediately dead. Witnesses, including a passing nurse, reported that he still had a faint pulse when first responders arrived. The coroner later confirmed that Dean likely suffered for a brief period before succumbing to internal hemorrhaging caused by a ruptured aorta. Wütherich, meanwhile, was thrown from the car and survived, only to live with severe injuries and PTSD for the rest of his life. Dean's death certificate listed his time of death as 5:59 p.m. His body was so badly mangled that the funeral required a closed casket. Marilyn Monroe, the overdose. Official cause of death confirmed a lethal dose of barbiturates, Nembutal, and chloral hydrate. But here's the thing: her stomach was empty. No traces of capsule residue, no sign of her swallowing over 40 pills. Just a body, face down, bruised, and a housekeeper who changed her story multiple times. The timeline was a mess. Monroe's psychiatrist, Dr. Ralph Greenson, reportedly broke into her room at 3:30 a.m. and found her dead. But early accounts said she was still alive when paramedics arrived. And her housekeeper? Eunice Murray, the last person to see Monroe alive, initially claimed she checked on her around midnight and found nothing unusual. Then, in a later interview, she slipped up saying, "Oh, why do I have to keep covering this up?" Then there were the missing phone records. Monroe was reportedly on the phone for hours that night. One call to actor Peter Lawford, who later said she sounded drugged and kept repeating, "Say goodbye to Pat, say goodbye to Jack." Jack, as in John F. Kennedy. Those records vanished. And let's talk about her organs, because they also disappeared. Standard autopsy procedure required tissue samples to be sent to labs for further analysis. But her vital organs, including the stomach, never returned. Without them, it was impossible to determine if the drugs were ingested or introduced another way, which brings us to the most unsettling detail. Toxicology confirmed a fatal dose of barbiturates, but there was no water in her stomach, making it unlikely she swallowed dozens of pills. No needle marks were recorded on her body, dismissing the injection theory. But her colon showed signs of irritation, leading some experts to believe the drugs were administered via enema. It was a known practice for fast absorption, especially in cases where a person was too sedated to swallow. And if she didn't administer it herself? Well, that's the question no one could or would answer. Natalie Wood, the drowning. November 29, 1981. The body of Natalie Wood was pulled from the waters off Catalina Island. She was found wearing a red down jacket, a flannel nightgown, and socks. an unusual outfit for someone who had supposedly gone for a late-night boat ride. The official cause of death: accidental drowning. But nothing about the scene made sense. The autopsy revealed fresh bruises on her arms, wrists, and legs, signs she had either fallen, been restrained, or struggled before entering the water. The report noted a small scrape on her left cheek and superficial injuries on her body, though none were classified as defensive wounds. Alcohol and painkillers were in her system, but not at overdose levels. The coroner initially ruled that she had likely slipped, fallen overboard, and drowned. Case closed. Except there were glaring inconsistencies. For one, Robert Wagner, her husband, waited hours before alerting authorities. Official reports say she had been missing since around midnight, yet the Coast Guard wasn't called until 1:30 a.m. The only other people on board Splendor that night: Christopher Walken and the boat's captain, Dennis Davern. Walken never publicly spoke about what happened. Davern, on the other hand, later admitted they had all been drinking heavily and that an argument had erupted before Wood somehow ended up in the water. Witnesses on nearby boats reported hearing a woman screaming for help that night, but no distress calls were made from Splendor. Wagner later admitted in his memoir that he and Wood had been fighting, but denied any involvement in her death. Yet, when Davern changed his story years later, claiming Wagner was responsible, the case was reopened in 2011. The cause of death was amended to drowning and other undetermined factors, citing the unexplained bruises and new witness statements. Wagner was eventually named a person of interest, but with no concrete evidence, no charges were filed. The mystery remains unresolved. How did Natalie Wood end up in the water? And why did it take so long to ask the right questions? Judy Garland, the final autopsy. Judy Garland's death certificate listed accidental barbiturate overdose. But the real horror wasn't just how she died, it was what led to it. When she was found in her London home on June 22, 1969, the scene was eerily calm. No distress, no final note, just the quiet end of a woman who had spent her life running on empty. The autopsy told the full story. Garland weighed only 90 pounds. Her body showed signs of severe malnutrition. Her liver was deteriorating, and her stomach was completely empty, meaning she hadn't eaten for some time before her death. The official cause: an accidental overdose of Seconal, a barbiturate she had relied on for years. Unlike Marilyn Monroe's case, there was no question of foul play, no suspicious bruises, no missing toxicology reports, just a tragic but predictable outcome. She had been prescribed barbiturates for decades, first by MGM studio doctors to keep her performing, then by personal physicians who likely meant well but contributed to her growing dependence. This wasn't a sudden overdose. It was a slow, decades-long breakdown. The same Hollywood machine that made her a star had systematically worn her down. Studio execs had put her on diet pills at 16, forced her through grueling filming schedules with uppers to keep her awake and downers to put her to sleep. And by the time she was an adult, her body no longer functioned without them. In the last years of her life, she was physically and financially exhausted. She had lost her home, struggled through multiple marriages, and relied on live performances just to survive. A 1968 interview showed her hands trembling as she tried to explain why she kept going. "I have to work. It's the only thing I know." The coroner ruled her death accidental, but that word barely scratches the surface. Judy Garland was worked to death before she ever stopped breathing. Bob Crane, the bludgeoning. The charismatic star of Hogan's Heroes, Bob Crane, was found brutally murdered in his Scottsdale, Arizona apartment on June 29, 1978. His death certificate listed the cause in stark clinical terms: homicide by blunt instrument. That barely scratched the surface of what police walked into. The crime scene was grisly. Crane was discovered in his bed, his skull shattered by multiple blows to the head. Blood spatter coated the walls and ceiling, and investigators determined the murder weapon was likely a heavy-duty camera tripod, His injuries were devastating: severe head trauma, deep lacerations, and massive hemorrhaging. The force of the blows suggested rage, not just an attempt to kill but to destroy. Then there was the electrical cord. It was wrapped around his neck, but there was no clear forensic evidence proving whether it was used to strangle him or simply placed there after death. The Scottsdale police were immediately suspicious. This wasn't a random attack, it was personal. Crane's complicated personal life only deepened the mystery. He had a well-documented habit of filming explicit tapes with various women, often alongside his closest friend, John Carpenter, not the director. Carpenter, a video equipment salesman, frequently supplied Crane with cameras and editing tools, making him more than just a bystander in Crane's secret lifestyle. And conveniently, he was one of the last people to see Crane alive. Police quickly zeroed in on Carpenter as the prime suspect. His rental car was searched, and inside they found traces of blood that matched Crane's blood type. But this was 1978. DNA testing wasn't where it is today. Blood type evidence wasn't enough for a conviction. Without a direct forensic link, the case stalled. Years later, in 1992, Carpenter was charged with Crane's murder when new technology allowed for DNA retesting. But the results were inconclusive, and he was acquitted. To this day, Bob Crane's murder remains officially unsolved. Sharon Tate, The Gruesome Reality. August 9, 1969. Sharon Tate's body was discovered inside the home she shared with her husband, director Roman Polanski, in Benedict Canyon. The address, 10,050 Cielo Drive, would forever be tied to one of the most horrific crimes in Hollywood history. But beyond the newspaper headlines and the chilling Manson family mythology, her autopsy revealed a reality even more brutal than the world initially knew. The official cause of death: multiple stab wounds. The coroner's report, however, exposed a level of savagery that defied logic. Tate, 8 months pregnant, was stabbed 16 times with 5 wounds considered fatal. Despite her pregnancy, she showed clear signs of trying to defend herself. Cuts and slashes on her arms and hands indicated she had fought back. Blood spatter evidence suggested she was still alive during most of the attack, enduring unimaginable pain as her killers carried out Charles Manson's twisted orders. The crime scene itself horrified even the most seasoned investigators. The walls were smeared with blood, with the word "pig" scrawled in Tate's own blood on the front door. A thick white rope was looped around her neck and tied to a ceiling beam, connecting her to the body of Jay Sebring, a celebrity hairstylist and her close friend, who had been killed before her. Tate's final moments were pure terror, pleading for the life of her unborn child before Watson and Krenwinkel struck the final blows. The autopsy put to rest several grisly rumors. There was no post-mortem mutilation. Her unborn child, a boy who would have been named Paul Richard Polanski, remained inside her. The infamous whispers that the baby had been cut from her body were entirely false. When the report was released, it further solidified the sheer brutality of the Manson family's crime spree. Her autopsy was the final word on a crime so horrific that it remains burned into public memory more than 50 years later. Most people never see a celebrity death certificate, but they're public, and when you read them closely, you start asking new questions. These aren't conspiracy theories. These are the facts everyone skipped while chasing the headlines. Fatty Arbuckle's quiet cardiac collapse. He was once the highest-paid actor in Hollywood. By 1921, that was over. 3 manslaughter trials destroyed his career. Though he was cleared of all charges, his name never recovered. He kept working behind the scenes, but the damage was done. 10 years later, he died in his sleep at 46. The death certificate listed myocardial infarction, a heart attack, but deeper reports show his heart had been struggling for years. Arbuckle was a heavy drinker, not just socially. During Prohibition, he still found bootleg liquor, and it took a toll. Friends said he'd gained weight again and was complaining of chest pain in the weeks before he died. He was in New York when it happened. The date was the 29th of June, 1933. The day before, Warner Brothers had just signed him to a new contract. For the first time in years, he was going to star in front of the camera again. He celebrated that night with friends, said he felt great, went to bed, never woke up. Doctors who examined him found that the heart's left artery had ruptured. His blood pressure was dangerously high. The coroner noted that Arbuckle's esophagus also showed signs of long-term strain, likely from chronic acid reflux or vomiting, both known symptoms tied to years of alcohol abuse and stress. The stomach lining was inflamed. The press treated it as a comeback story cut short, but Arbuckle's death certificate showed this was a slow burn, the kind that builds quietly, unnoticed, until it wins. His wife, Addie, told reporters he was finally at peace. He died happy, she said. There was no funeral spectacle. He was cremated at Forest Lawn with only a small group in attendance. His ashes weren't interred until much later. Peg Antwistle's delayed impact discovery. She had one film credit, but her name became forever tied to the Hollywood sign. On the 18th of September, 1932, a hiker found her body below the H, along with her purse, shoes, and a note. The story was front-page news. A rising actress, dead at 24. But the coroner's report revealed something most people didn't know. Antwistle didn't die instantly from the fall. Her death certificate, filed by the L.A. County coroner, listed multiple fractures of the pelvis, spine, and skull. But in the notes, the examiner described signs of internal trauma inconsistent with a clean break. Her lungs had filled with fluid, and there was bruising that suggested her heart continued beating after impact. It meant she likely survived for several minutes, possibly even longer, after landing in the brush below the letter. There were also signs of movement. One shoe had been kicked off a short distance from her body. Her handbag was still clasped shut. A trail of flattened grass, stretching about 10 feet, was found beside her. No dragging, no blood trail. Just evidence that she might have shifted or rolled before losing consciousness. The note, found inside her purse, was short. "I'm afraid I'm a coward. I'm sorry for everything." But the real shock came days later. Her uncle, who had raised her, received a letter from RKO Pictures. Peg had just been offered a lead role in a new film. It had been mailed before she died. Her death certificate was filed under her full name, Millicent Lillian Antwistle. Her body was cremated and sent back to Ohio, where her father was buried. Lupe Velez's report disputed press accounts. She was one of the first Mexican stars in Hollywood. She was bold, outspoken, and a comedy icon in the 1930s. But by the mid-1940s, her career had cooled. On the 13th of December, 1944, she was found dead in her Beverly Hills home. Newspapers said she took sleeping pills and died peacefully in bed, but the coroner's findings told a different story. Her official death certificate listed the cause as seconal poisoning, but she wasn't in bed. She was found face down near the toilet in her bathroom. Her maid discovered her the next morning with the room in disarray. That detail was left out of early reports to preserve her image. The autopsy confirmed a large amount of seconal in her bloodstream, enough to be fatal. But there was another detail, signs of vomiting. Her lungs showed fluid consistent with inhalation of stomach contents. The coroner noted that she had likely become sick shortly after taking the pills and collapsed while trying to reach the bathroom. There was also a strong scent of perfume and makeup freshly applied. Her hair had been carefully styled. She had written a note addressed to her lover Harold Ramond, saying she was too sad to go on. The note was signed and dated. What made it worse was the press spin. Gossip columnists painted a romantic, almost glamorous version of events. Some stories claimed she had planned the entire thing for dramatic effect. Others invented myths, like her being found on satin sheets surrounded by candles. None of that was true. The coroner's report cut through the noise. She had acted alone, but it hadn't gone as planned. The report even noted the bruises on her shins and knees, likely from hitting the tile floor during the collapse. That part never made it to print. She was 36. Her final scene wasn't scripted, and her death certificate recorded what Hollywood wouldn't say. She died trying to make it look perfect. It wasn't. Albert Decker's complex scene ruled accidental. He was a seasoned actor, working in film, stage, and politics. Known for villain roles in the 1940s and 50s, he stepped back from acting later in life. On May 5, 1968, he was found dead in his Hollywood Hills home. The scene was so bizarre, police suspected foul play, but the death certificate told a different story. He was discovered by his fiancée, who forced open the bathroom door after not hearing from him for several days. He was found in the tub, unclothed, with accessories that suggested deliberate staging. A cord was secured to the shower rod, and his wrists and ankles had light bindings. He was wearing sunglasses, and a cloth had been placed over his mouth. Investigators also noted markings on his body, written in red lipstick, consisting of scattered phrases and symbols. Despite how it looked, the Los Angeles County coroner found no signs of a struggle, no bruises that would suggest restraint, no evidence anyone else had been in the apartment. The autopsy revealed death by asphyxiation due to partial hanging. It was ruled accidental. Toxicology came back clean. No alcohol, no drugs. The knot was tied in a way that allowed him to slip in and out of it himself. Investigators determined he had likely lost consciousness while experimenting with pressure on the neck, an activity not uncommon, though rarely discussed. Decker's belongings were untouched. Cash, jewelry, and personal effects remained in plain sight. His fiancée told police he had done this kind of thing before, though never to this extent. She hadn't thought much of it until he stopped returning her calls. Decker's body was cremated, and no public service was held. His name faded from headlines quickly, but for years, his death was used as tabloid fodder. Dorothy Dandridge's fractured foot overlooked. She broke barriers. She was the first black woman nominated for a Best Actress Oscar, but Hollywood didn't give her much after that. By the 1960s, roles had dried up, and money was tight. On the 8th of September, 1965, she was found dead in her apartment in West Hollywood. She was 42. The death certificate listed acute drug intoxication due to an overdose of Twinyl, a sedative. It had been prescribed. Early reports called it accidental. Some quietly speculated it was intentional, but the autopsy raised quiet questions. For one, there was no note, no high alcohol level. Her doctor had prescribed the drug for anxiety and insomnia, but she hadn't taken a massive amount, just enough to affect her central nervous system. The medical examiner noted a likely interaction with her existing health conditions. Her liver showed signs of long-term strain. The overlooked detail: her right foot was broken, a fresh fracture, no cast. The coroner's notes described it as a recent traumatic injury. The bruising suggested it happened within 48 hours of death. She had canceled a performance in Seattle just days before, claiming illness. Friends said she'd been limping. The apartment was in order. Her manager discovered her body on the bathroom floor after she missed a scheduled phone call. She was wearing a robe. The scene was clean, quiet. Her death was ruled accidental, but the foot injury stayed a loose end. It was logged in the final report, but left out of most press coverage. Just one more detail that didn't fit the headlines. Dandridge was cremated and interred at Forest Lawn, Inger Stevens's carpet scratch mark. She was a rising star in the 1960s. Known for her work in The Farmer's Daughter and several dramatic films, she had just started making a comeback. On the 30th of April, 1970, she collapsed in the kitchen of her Hollywood Hills home. Her roommate found her early that morning. She was rushed to the hospital but pronounced dead shortly after arrival. She was 35. The official cause of death was listed on the certificate as acute barbiturate poisoning. The coroner ruled it an accidental overdose, but the full report hinted that the end wasn't immediate. Toxicology confirmed a lethal level of barbiturates in her blood. Not enough for a quick collapse, though. Based on absorption rates, the examiner estimated she had been conscious for some time after taking the pills. Her stomach showed signs of digestion, and there was discoloration on her fingers and knees, suggesting she had crawled after losing balance. The most chilling detail was found in the living room carpet. The coroner's notes described linear fiber pulls near the body, tiny thread marks consistent with dragging or clutching. Her nails were worn. It looked like she had tried to pull herself across the floor, possibly for help, possibly toward the phone. There were no signs of trauma, forced entry, or violence. Her roommate told police she hadn't seemed depressed and had been planning a trip for the following week. They had dinner the night before, and nothing seemed unusual. But Stevens had a history of taking sleeping pills, and combining prescriptions may have tipped the balance. She also kept her private life extremely quiet. It wasn't until after her death that the public learned she had secretly married Ike Jones, a black film producer. At the time, interracial marriages in Hollywood were career-ending. The marriage certificate had been filed in secret in 1961. They'd lived apart to avoid scrutiny. Inger Stevens was cremated, and no autopsy photos were released. Her death didn't spark a scandal, but the quiet facts in her coroner's report told a different story. One of a woman who didn't fade away peacefully, but tried to fight for just a few more minutes. Sal Mineo's defensive wounds. He was a teen idol in the 1950s. He earned an Oscar nomination for Rebel Without a Cause and had a promising future. By the mid-1970s, he was rebuilding his career, taking on stage roles and living quietly in West Hollywood. On the 12th of February, 1976, he was attacked outside his apartment after rehearsal. He was 37. The death certificate listed stab wound to the chest. He died within minutes, but the autopsy revealed more than just a fatal injury. Mineo had several cuts on his hands and forearms. The coroner marked them as defensive wounds. He had fought back. The attack happened fast. Witnesses heard shouting and found him collapsed in the carport, bleeding heavily. He had one major wound to the heart, but it was the smaller cuts that told the story. The report noted that the fatal injury punctured the aorta, causing rapid internal bleeding. He was conscious for a short time, not long enough for help to arrive. Nothing was stolen. His wallet and watch were still on him. That led to early speculation that it might have been a targeted attack. But within a year, police arrested a man named Lionel Ray Williams, a local with a string of robberies in the area. He denied involvement. Years later, he was convicted based on witness testimony, though no weapon was ever found. Mineo's body showed no signs of drug or alcohol use. He had spent the evening running lines at a local theater, clean clothes, no signs of a struggle in his apartment, just a quick, brutal encounter steps from his door. He was buried at Gate of Heaven Cemetery in New York. His mother requested privacy, and the case faded from national headlines. But the death certificate recorded what mattered most: a single fatal wound, multiple attempts to defend himself, and a life cut short not by scandal, but by a random, senseless act of violence. Charles Boyer's coordinated overdose. He had one of the smoothest voices in Hollywood. Known for Gaslight and a string of romantic dramas, he built a long, steady career. But behind the scenes, he was devoted to his wife, actress Pat Patterson. When she died of cancer in August 1978, Boyer didn't wait long to follow her. He was 78. On the 26th of August, 2 days after his wife's passing, Boyer died in Phoenix, Arizona. The death certificate listed intentional overdose of Seconal. The coroner classified it as intentional, but it wasn't impulsive. The report pointed to careful preparation. There were 4 types of barbiturates in his system. All were legally prescribed. None were taken in excess individually, but together they slowed his heart to a stop. The toxicologist noted the combination had been taken in staggered doses over several hours. A will had been signed the day before. Bank accounts were in order. A note was left, short and direct. It stated his grief and his desire to be with her. There was no mention of pain, illness, or confusion, no sign of outside influence. It was a quiet decision from a man who had lost the person he built his life around. He was found in bed at a friend's home. His son and close friends were notified after the police confirmed the scene. Boyer had told no one in advance. His final hours were spent alone. The coroner's report showed no evidence of long-term substance misuse. His liver, kidneys, and heart were in good condition for his age. That fact confirmed the intent. He wasn't failing. He simply didn't want to live without her. The funeral was private. His ashes were interred next to his wife in Dallas. The news reached headlines briefly, mostly overseas. In France, he was mourned as a national treasure. In Hollywood, the story was more subdued. Dana Plato's delay in help. She became famous overnight playing Kimberly Drummond on Different Strokes, but fame didn't last. By the late 1990s, she was living in an RV with her fiancé, doing radio appearances and trying to revive her image. On May 8, 1999, one day after a live interview defending her sobriety, she was found dead in her motorhome in Moore, Oklahoma. She was 34. The death certificate listed fatal overdose of Lortab and Soma. Both were legally prescribed. Lortab for pain, Soma as a muscle relaxant. The medical examiner ruled it accidental, but the coroner's report pointed out that the dose of each medication was within the prescribed limit. It was the combination that caused her breathing to slow and eventually stop. She died sometime in the afternoon. Her fiancé told investigators she had gone to lie down and didn't wake up. He waited several hours before calling emergency services. The delay was noted in the police report, but no charges were filed. There was no sign of struggle, trauma, or illegal substances. Toxicology results came back clean aside from the 2 medications. No alcohol, no street drugs. Her liver showed early signs of damage, likely from years of substance use, but not severe enough to be fatal on its own. The medical examiner noted the absence of food in her stomach, which may have caused the pills to hit harder and faster. She had just spoken publicly about trying to get better. The day before, she appeared upbeat, but according to the report, she hadn't taken the medications under supervision. No pill count was done. No one checked on her for hours. Her body was cremated. No autopsy photos were released. Her son, Tyler, was 14 at the time. Years later, he would die on the same day, May 8. David Carradine's cause remains unclear. He made his name in the 1970s as the star of Kung Fu and later appeared in Quentin Tarantino's Kill Bill films. He had a long, unpredictable career and an even stranger ending. On the 4th of June, 2009, Keredine was found dead in a Bangkok hotel room. He was 72. Initial reports called it intentional. That changed quickly. Thai authorities released the death certificate stating asphyxiation as the cause, but they didn't classify it as self-harm. The exact circumstances were labeled unusual, with no final ruling made at the time. The position of the body and the items found in the closet led to widespread speculation. Police said there were no signs of forced entry. Security footage showed no one entering or leaving his room, but investigators found physical evidence that suggested Keredine may have died from a risky form of accidental self-asphyxiation. The coroner in Thailand performed a full autopsy. Later, Keredine's family requested an independent pathologist in the U.S. to conduct a second review. That Dr. Michael Baden confirmed there was no sign of trauma or struggle, but the positioning and physical evidence pointed to an accident involving restricted airflow. The family pushed for further investigation. Keredine's ex-wives and children released statements asking for privacy but expressed doubt about the circumstances. Meanwhile, Thai police closed the case with no charges filed. The U.S. State Department reviewed the case and found no reason to intervene. The final U.S. death certificate repeated the cause as accidental asphyxiation. The exact method was not listed, in line with privacy standards. His remains were returned to Los Angeles and cremated. A quiet ceremony was held with family and a few close friends. Keredine's death made headlines for all the wrong reasons, but the official documents stayed neutral. No sensational claims, no conclusion beyond the physical facts. Asphyxiation, no substances, no foul play. Just a strange, solitary end to a career full of unpredictable turns. His death certificate didn't explain the why. It only recorded what could be proved. And for a man who built his legacy playing mystery-driven roles, that ending almost fit. You know how they died? No, you don't. Because the death certificate doesn't tell you about the phone cord, the shattered bladder, or the dog. Virginia Rappe's mysterious organ rupture. She was only 30 when she died after a party at the Street Francis Hotel in San Francisco. The headlines blamed Roscoe Fatty Arbuckle almost immediately, but the autopsy told a story full of medical questions and missing context. The report listed peritonitis from a ruptured bladder as the official cause of death. But the injury itself was strange. Her bladder wasn't just torn, it was described as shattered, with internal bleeding spreading through her abdomen. Doctors had rarely seen damage that severe without major external trauma. There were no signs of stab wounds or sharp force. The surface of her body had few visible bruises. Yet inside, the injury was catastrophic. One theory at the time was that her bladder had burst due to chronic inflammation. The medical report did include signs of cystitis, long-term bladder irritation, but that alone didn't explain the full rupture. Investigators were divided. Some believed trauma played a role, others pointed to pre-existing conditions. Arbuckle was charged with manslaughter. During the trials, expert witnesses clashed over what could have caused such an injury. 3 trials followed. 2 ended without verdicts. The final one cleared him of all charges. Still, the damage to his career was permanent. What didn't help was how vague the death certificate was. It confirmed peritonitis but left out details about how the injury may have occurred. That left the public filling in the blanks, often with the worst assumptions. Virginia Rappe's death became one of Hollywood's first scandals, but the real mystery never made the front page. A shattered organ, a half-explained injury, and a death certificate that answered almost nothing. Fatty Arbuckle's hidden heart condition. He died in his sleep at age 46. The official cause was heart failure, but the autopsy revealed more than that simple label suggested. His heart was severely enlarged, so much so that the examiner described it as resembling that of an ox. It had been working too hard for too long. The muscle was stretched, the strain obvious, and failure was already underway. For years, Arbuckle had lived under stress. After the Virginia Rappe scandal destroyed his career, he tried to rebuild his life in vaudeville and behind the camera. According to studio memos, he was working on a comeback at the time of his death, reportedly happier than he'd been in years. But his body told a different story. Medical examiners found heavy scarring around the coronary arteries. This wasn't a recent problem. His heart had been under pressure for a long time. Experts later noted that his lifestyle, constant travel, alcohol use, and significant weight gain likely pushed his heart past the point of recovery. His sudden collapse in a New York hotel room shocked the few who still followed his career. He had just signed a new contract with Warner Brothers under his real name, Will Be Good. That same night, he celebrated with friends. By the next morning, he was gone. What creeped people out later wasn't just the death, it was how the autopsy contradicted the public image. Arbuckle was always the cheerful giant, the big man with the bigger laugh. No one thought about his health. In truth, his body was in a state of failure. Wallace Reid's addiction-fueled decline. When he entered the sanitarium in late 1922, the public was told he had a bad case of the flu. He didn't. By the time he died in January 1923, his body told a story no fan had ever heard. The autopsy revealed morphine poisoning as a contributing factor in his death. The addiction had started years earlier, after a train wreck during filming left him badly injured. Instead of proper recovery, Reid was given morphine so he could keep working. The studios needed him on set. He became dependent. Reid's charm and looks made him a major star of the silent era. He was the all-American heartthrob, but behind that image, his health was crumbling. The autopsy described damage to multiple organs, including his liver and kidneys. The scarring was consistent with long-term substance use. What's strange is how the death certificate completely skipped over the drug issue. It listed influenza as the official cause. That may have been partially true. He did have a respiratory illness, but the real problem was what was already in his bloodstream. Studio executives didn't want the public to know. A full-blown drug scandal involving one of their biggest stars could have wrecked box office sales, so they stuck to the flu story. Quietly, they worked with doctors to bury the toxicology findings. After his death, rumors started circulating in fan magazines, but the truth didn't fully come out until years later when insiders admitted what had really happened. His widow, Dorothy Davenport, tried to use his death to warn others. She even produced a film called Human Wreckage about the dangers of addiction. Wallace Reid was a leading man in the silent era, but the silence around his death was anything but noble. It was carefully managed, right down to what the death certificate refused to say. Barbara Lamar's toxic blood. The studio press release blamed tuberculosis. It was a neat, tragic story, a glamorous star taken too soon by illness. But the coroner's findings painted a very different picture. Barbara Lamar's autopsy revealed a mix of substances in her bloodstream, including cocaine and alcohol. The concentration levels were high enough to suggest prolonged use, not a one-time lapse. Her death was ultimately ruled as complications from exhaustion, but the toxicology report raised serious questions about what really led to her collapse. Known for her striking looks and on-screen intensity, Lamar had been working non-stop. She wrote screenplays, starred in over 20 films, and partied with Hollywood's elite. Friends later said she barely slept, often relying on drugs to stay thin and energized. Doctors had warned her to rest, but she ignored them. Work came first. By the time she fainted on set in late 1925, her body was already showing signs of major organ stress, Hospital records show her liver was inflamed. Her kidneys were struggling to filter toxins. The autopsy later confirmed both organs were chemically damaged, a term used to describe tissue that had broken down due to repeated exposure to harsh substances. One detail stood out in the report. Her blood was described as thick with toxic compounds. That wasn't just poetic language. It indicated reduced oxygen flow and poor circulation, both of which could cause fatigue, confusion, and eventually collapse. Lamar had been trying to hide the extent of her health problems. She wore heavy makeup to cover her declining appearance. Studio photographers retouched her images. On the outside, she looked like a goddess. On the inside, her body was shutting down. Her death certificate didn't mention drugs or alcohol. It listed tuberculosis and nephritis. Both were real, but incomplete. What it didn't say was that her lifestyle had pushed every system in her body to the edge. Valentino's stomach eaten away. He collapsed in New York after a promotional event. At first, doctors thought it was appendicitis. Surgery confirmed something worse, a perforated gastric ulcer that had already leaked infection into his abdomen. Rudolph Valentino died 8 days later at just 31. The autopsy revealed his stomach lining had eroded so severely that pus-filled cavities had formed around his organs. The damage suggested the ulcer had been growing for a long time, likely made worse by stress, poor diet, and the constant pressure of stardom. By the time anyone caught it, infection had spread beyond control. The official cause was listed as peritonitis, brought on by a perforated ulcer. But what stunned the doctors was the extent of the decay. His abdominal cavity was full of fluid, tissue breakdown was advanced. The report described his internal condition as septic and deteriorated. Fans, meanwhile, were losing their minds. Valentino's death sparked riots at funeral homes, with mourners fainting in the streets and windows shattered by crowds desperate to get a glimpse of his body. What they didn't know was that embalmers had a difficult time preparing him. His face had started to swell and discolor from the internal infection. It took hours of work to restore his signature look for public viewing. According to funeral home records, multiple cosmetic treatments were used to preserve his appearance. For someone whose fame was built on looks, the irony was brutal. Rudolph Valentino died with the world watching, but the last days of his life were defined not by glamour, but by organ failure and slow, painful decline. His image stayed perfect, his body far from it. Lon Chaney's silent throat bleed. Doctors had been monitoring his health for months. By the time he checked into the hospital, his condition had turned critical. He struggled to breathe and couldn't speak without pain. The official cause of death was a throat hemorrhage brought on by bronchial cancer, but the autopsy revealed just how advanced the damage had become. His lungs were filled with blood. The tumors had eaten into his airway, causing slow internal bleeding that eventually suffocated him. Known for playing monsters and tortured souls in silent films, Lon Chaney had made a name for himself by transforming his face and body into horror icons. But in the end, it wasn't makeup or prosthetics that left a lasting impression. It was the grim medical details left behind. The report described his vocal cords as nearly destroyed. The cancer had eroded the tissue in his throat to the point where speaking had become almost impossible. In interviews shortly before his death, he relied on handwritten notes to communicate. According to hospital records, he suffered multiple coughing fits in his final hours, expelling blood but refusing morphine for most of his stay. The internal damage was so severe that doctors noted pulmonary drowning as a secondary cause. Chaney had kept the illness quiet for as long as he could. Public appearances grew rare. Some assumed he was just taking a break. The truth was far more painful. He was fading, and he knew it. When the autopsy was filed, one physician reportedly remarked that the amount of internal blood loss was more than expected. His lungs were heavy with fluid. His airways collapsed. John Gilbert's liver destroyed. News reports called it a heart attack. The studio said he passed suddenly at home. But the medical examiner's report pointed to something deeper, damage that had been building for years. John Gilbert's autopsy revealed extensive liver cirrhosis. The tissue was hardened, scarred, and failing. Jaundice had set in. His skin had taken on a yellow hue. The report noted significant hepatic deterioration, meaning the heart failure wasn't just cardiac, it was alcohol-related. The drinking had been public for years. Onset delays, missed shoots, slurred lines, rumors swirled in the tabloids. Insiders blamed his decline on personal troubles and career setbacks, especially after the transition to sound. But the medical findings didn't point to burnout, but to physical breakdown. His liver had shrunk. Veins in the abdomen showed signs of portal hypertension, meaning blood flow through the liver had been restricted. Fluid had started building up in his stomach. He was decompensating. The heart attack may have been the final blow, but his body had been losing ground long before that. By the time of death, his organs were already failing. The death certificate kept things simple. It named coronary thrombosis, a clot in the arteries leading to the heart. No mention of cirrhosis, no mention of alcohol. For the public, Gilbert remained the romantic lead. The voice didn't kill his career, just a heart that gave out too early. Behind closed doors, MGM sent private condolences and moved on. His decline was never headline material. There were no explosive exposés, just steady, visible deterioration masked by Hollywood polish. According to the attending physician's notes, he hadn't been eating much near the end. He complained of fatigue, stomach swelling, and shortness of breath, all common symptoms of late-stage liver disease. Marie Prevost's body consumed itself. Found alone in her Los Angeles apartment, the scene offered no immediate answers. It took days before anyone noticed she was missing. By then, her body had already begun to break down. The coroner's report listed acute alcoholism as the cause of death, but the autopsy uncovered something worse. Severe malnutrition was evident. Her body weight had dropped drastically. Her stomach was almost empty. There were signs of autolysis. Her own tissues had started digesting themselves in the absence of nutrients. Marie Prevost had once been a major star in silent films, known for comedic timing and charm. But in her final years, the roles dried up. So did the money. Studio contracts stopped coming. Bills piled up. She lived in near isolation, surviving mostly on canned food and alcohol. The report also noted heavy damage to her liver, consistent with long-term alcohol use. Her muscles were wasting. Fat deposits had almost vanished. One line in the file simply read, "Advanced starvation." But the most disturbing detail came from the scene itself. Her dachshund had survived by gnawing on her remains. It wasn't a violent act, just desperation. The medical examiner included the detail in the report, and the press ran with it, turning a tragic death into grotesque headlines. What didn't get as much attention was how preventable it all was. Prevost had been seeking help from former contacts in the industry. She'd sent letters. Most went unanswered. A few payments from the Motion Picture Relief Fund came in too late. Her death certificate left out many of the disturbing physical details. It simply recorded alcohol poisoning. But those who saw the full report knew the truth was far more complex and more haunting. This wasn't a sudden overdose or freak illness. It was a slow, grinding collapse of health, opportunity, and support. By the time anyone noticed, it was already over. Prevost's decline wasn't just physical. It was social, professional, emotional. Her body gave up after everything else had. The final report confirmed it in clinical terms, but no amount of medical language softened the reality. She died, starving and alone, in the shadow of a life the public had already forgotten. Clara Bow's damaged heart revealed. Heart attack was the official cause, but the heart itself told a longer story. Deep scarring covered the muscle, signs of long-term inflammation that most likely started when she was a child. The autopsy found fibrous tissue spread across both ventricles. Medical examiners suspected it was the result of rheumatic fever, an illness that often went undiagnosed in the 1910s. Over time, the damage compounded. By the time she reached her 60s, her heart was fragile, held together by worn muscle and scar tissue. Clara Bow had once been the face of the jazz age. Studios labeled her the It Girl. She starred in dozens of films, always lively, always bold. But off-screen, her health declined for years. She withdrew from public life in the 1940s, moving to Nevada with her husband and rarely giving interviews. Few fans knew how bad things had gotten. In her final years, she was reclusive and anxious, occasionally hospitalized for exhaustion or nervous symptoms, according to press clippings. Those vague terms masked a variety of health concerns, mental and physical, that were barely understood or treated at the time. The autopsy report listed myocardial infarction, but added a note about chronic cardiac scarring throughout the muscle walls. Her heart had likely been weakening for decades, operating under strain without her knowledge. Her death may have been sudden, but it didn't come out of nowhere. Family members said she hadn't complained of chest pain, but had been tired and quiet in the days before she died. She passed away at home in her sleep. Her death certificate didn't mention the extent of damage found during the examination. Just one word: infarction. For someone remembered for her high energy and screen presence, the contrast was sharp. The same heart that powered her through Hollywood's loudest decade ended with barely a sound. It wasn't a scandal, and it wasn't hidden, but it was overlooked. Clara Bow lived with a failing heart for most of her life, and no one, not even she, seemed to realize it until the end. Ramon Navarro's suffocation horror. When police arrived at the Laurel Canyon home, they found the scene disturbing but unclear. There were no gunshots, no stab wounds, no immediate explanation for how Ramon Navarro had died. The autopsy provided it. Cause of death: asphyxiation due to airway obstruction. His lungs and stomach contained blood, indicating he had choked while still alive, on blood from internal injuries. The report documented bruising on the face and chest, fractured ribs, and internal hemorrhaging. The source: blunt force trauma. One detail shocked even seasoned investigators. A telephone receiver had been forced down his throat. It wasn't visible from the outside. It was discovered during the internal examination. Navarro had opened his door that night to two young men who claimed to be fans. Instead, they tied him up and demanded money. According to court records, the beating began when they couldn't find it. Though he reportedly confessed to having a small sum hidden, they continued the attack. He died hours later, alone, restrained, and unable to call for help. The death certificate listed asphyxia due to airway obstruction and multiple traumatic injuries. The coroner's office noted that he likely remained conscious during part of the assault. Blood in the lungs and stomach confirmed active breathing when the trauma occurred. There were no drugs or alcohol in his system. His body showed signs of resistance, defensive wounds on his arms and wrists, but he hadn't stood a chance. Navarro had been a major silent film star in the 1920s, often called the successor to Valentino. By the 1960s, his fame had faded, but he remained a well-known figure in old Hollywood circles. His death stunned the industry. The press reported it as a robbery gone wrong, but those who read the autopsy file saw more than a robbery. They saw a calculated, brutal killing carried out with no urgency, no panic, just cruelty. No one expected that his name would end up in court transcripts and forensic reports instead of film credits. The man known for romantic leads and sweeping epics died in silence, with the phone receiver still lodged in his throat. Hollywood moved on, but the report never did. It captured every injury, every final moment, with clinical precision and no mercy. Most people get a headstone. These celebrities got cannon launches, sea burials, and smuggled space missions. Their final requests broke every rule, and no one stopped them. Shakespeare's bone-cursed tomb. William didn't trust grave robbers. He didn't want to be dug up, moved, or studied. So he wrote his own warning and had it carved onto his tombstone before he died. He was buried under the floor of Holy Trinity Church in Stratford-upon-Avon. That alone was unusual. Most people were buried outside, but Shakespeare had influence. He secured a spot inside the church, near the altar, and then added a message for anyone thinking about disturbing his bones. The warning reads, "Good friend, for Jesus' sake forbear, to dig the dust enclosed here. Blessed be the man that spares these stones, and cursed be he that moves my bones." Not subtle, and people have listened. His grave has never been opened, even when other famous writers had theirs moved or examined. In fact, when researchers in the 1800s asked to dig him up for study, they were denied. Even today, British scientists have debated whether to use modern technology to scan or open the grave. They backed off. There was one exception. In 2016, archaeologists used radar to take a peek beneath the stone. What they found was strange. The grave had no metal coffin, no nameplate, and maybe no skull. The head might be missing. A rumor dating back to the 1800s claimed someone stole it from the grave, but without opening the tomb, no one can confirm anything. Still, the curse worked. For over 400 years, people have left Shakespeare alone. That's rare. Most historical figures, even royalty, have had their remains disturbed, studied, or relocated. Shakespeare made sure he stayed put. Just a few lines of poetry, and the world backed off. His tomb doesn't stand out. It's a simple stone slab, just a few feet long, flat against the church floor. Tourists walk over it every day. But that slab might be the most successfully guarded grave in history, without any guards at all. No bones have been moved, no scientists allowed, and not a single person has dared to test the curse. That's Shakespeare's final plot twist, and it's lasted longer than any of his plays. Houdini's Secret Code Grave. Harry didn't believe in ghosts, but he was open to proving himself wrong. Before he died, he made a promise to his wife, Bess. If there really was an afterlife, he'd send her a message from the other side. A code. Something only the two of them knew. The secret phrase was made up of 10 words. Bess memorized it. They never wrote it down. Houdini told her that if any medium came forward claiming to contact his spirit, she should ask for the code. If they couldn't give it, they were fakes. After Houdini died on Halloween 1926, Bess held a seance every year on the anniversary of his death. Always on the roof of their home, always in silence, candles lit. She invited friends, reporters, and psychics. For 10 years, she waited. Each time, someone claimed to reach him. Each time, the code was wrong. She finally gave up in 1936. She said, 10 years is long enough to wait for any man. The last seance was held at the Knickerbocker Hotel in Hollywood. Nothing happened. Houdini stayed silent. His grave is in Machpelah Cemetery in Queens, New York. It's marked with a large granite monument, his name carved boldly into the front. Around it sit smaller graves of family members, but it's the Houdini name that draws fans, magicians, and skeptics alike. People still visit, hoping to feel something strange. The grave has been vandalized over the years, but the legend has stayed intact. Some magicians still hold seances there on Halloween, though it's more tribute than belief at this point. No one expects a code anymore. And the actual phrase? Bess never revealed it. That was the final layer of protection. Without the code, no one could fake contact. Even now, no one knows what it was. Houdini escaped handcuffs, jail cells, and sealed crates. But death? That's the one thing he couldn't break out of. And maybe he knew it. That's why the code mattered so much. It wasn't about proving life after death. It was about proving honesty in a world full of fakes. Eva Peron's Body Odyssey. She died young, but her body didn't stay put. In fact, it spent more time being hidden, stolen, and smuggled than it ever did resting in peace. When she passed in 1952, the Argentine government had her embalmed by a specialist named Dr. Pedro Ara. He preserved her so well that people said she looked like she was sleeping. The body was displayed in Buenos Aires for weeks, where millions lined up to say goodbye. Then the politics got messy. In 1955, her husband, President Juan Perón, was overthrown by a military coup. The new rulers wanted Eva's influence erased. Her corpse was stolen and disappeared. For years, no one knew where it was. Turns out it had been secretly shipped to Italy and buried under a fake name in a Milan cemetery. The tombstone read, Maria Maggi. That was meant to keep grave robbers and political enemies away. It worked. For a while. In 1971, after 16 years underground, Eva's body was exhumed and flown to Spain, where Juan Perón was living in exile. He kept her in his house, stored in a coffin near the dining room. His third wife, Isabel, reportedly combed Eva's hair and kept the body cleaned. This wasn't a museum. This was their home. After Juan Perón returned to power in Argentina in the 70s, Eva's body was eventually brought back too. She was buried at Recoleta Cemetery in Buenos Aires, in her family's tomb. But this time, the grave was reinforced with concrete, steel, and multiple trapdoors. It's one of the most secure burial sites on Earth. People still visit her there. Some bring flowers. Some bring questions. The journey of her body turned into its own political saga. It passed through countries, regimes, and decades of fear. Most world leaders are buried with ceremony and permanence. Eva's final resting place took nearly 25 years to get right, and even now, her grave isn't about peace, it's about protection. Groucho Marx's joke headstone. He spent his whole life making people laugh. Naturally, he had jokes ready for death too. One of his favorites? He once said his gravestone should read, "Excuse me, I can't stand up." Friends loved it. Fans expected it. But when he died, the line didn't make the cut. Instead, he was cremated and placed in a simple crypt at Eden Memorial Park in Mission Hills, California. The plaque is plain, just his name, Groucho Marx. No joke, no famous last words. No mustache engraving. Nothing flashy. Why didn't the funny epitaph make it? Some say the family wanted a more respectful tone. Others think Groucho was just being Groucho, joking around, not giving instructions. Either way, it surprised a lot of people. Even without the punchline, the grave draws visitors. Fans leave fake mustaches, cigars, and handwritten notes. Some scribble quotes from his movies. Others just take pictures in silence. It's become more of a comedy shrine than a quiet resting place. Groucho didn't like seriousness. He poked fun at everything. Hollywood, fame, even death. In one interview, when asked about the afterlife, he said, "I intend to live forever or die trying." He didn't, but his style lived on. The odd part, there's another empty crypt nearby with his brother Gummo's name on it. Gummo was buried elsewhere. It's just sitting there, labeled and unused. Some fans think that's the real Groucho joke, an unoccupied grave right next to him, labeled for the wrong brother. Even in death, Groucho got people talking. And even though the gravestone didn't get the big laugh he wanted, the fans make up for it. They bring the humor with them. The place feels less like a cemetery and more like the set of a very quiet comedy show. Tupac's cremains rolled in blunt. Shakur's death was followed by conspiracy theories, tributes, and rumors that haven't stopped since 1996. But one post-death story stands out not for mystery, but for how strange and specific it is. In 2001, members of Tupac's rap group, The Outlaws, went public with a claim they had smoked some of his ashes. Yes, literally. In an interview with MTV and again in a later documentary, they explained how it happened. They were on a beach, holding a private tribute. Someone rolled a blunt, mixed in a pinch of cremains, and lit it. Why would they do that? According to the group, it was Tupac's idea. In his 1996 song Black Jesus, he rapped, "Last wishes and smoke my ashes." That line wasn't just a throwaway. The Outlaws took it seriously. They said it felt right, like honoring a pact. The reaction was mixed. Some fans were stunned. Others didn't believe it. A few even said it was disrespectful. But the Outlaws stood by it. They claimed it was a private moment, not a stunt. No photos, no press, just them and the beach. And the ashes? Tupac was cremated shortly after his death. The exact location of his remains has never been confirmed. There's no public gravesite, no memorial, no plaque. That only added fuel to the rumors. Some fans insist he faked his death. Others believe the smoking story proves there's no body to find. But the cremation was real. The autopsy report confirms it. His mother, Afeni Shakur, handled the arrangements. She never commented on the Outlaws story, but she did protect Tupac's legacy fiercely. If she had wanted to shut the rumor down, she would have. Tupac's influence was massive, even in death. His lyrics, his image, his voice, they never really left. The idea of his ashes being smoked sounds unbelievable until you realize who he was. Tupac didn't follow rules. He challenged them. Even his funeral wasn't typical. There was no church service, no long eulogy. Just a sudden goodbye. So if his closest friends lit one up with his ashes in it, weird as it sounds, it might be the most Tupac thing they could have done. Whether you believe it or not, it's one of the strangest send-offs in music history. James Doohan's space launch funeral. He spent decades pretending to fly through space as Scotty on Star Trek. After he died in 2005, part of him actually made the trip. Doohan was cremated shortly after his death. His family wanted to honor his biggest wish, to have his ashes launched into space. They didn't rush it. In 2007, a small portion of his remains were sent on a brief suborbital flight by Space Services Inc., a private company offering memorial launches. The flight went up, came down, and scattered the ashes in the atmosphere. That alone would have made headlines. But that wasn't the strangest part. In 2008, entrepreneur Richard Garriott became the 6th private citizen to travel to the International Space Station. He quietly brought a laminated card containing Doohan's ashes, hidden in the floor of the Columbus module. He didn't tell NASA until later. The plan wasn't official, it was personal. Garriott had known Doohan and wanted to do something meaningful. The secret was kept for years. Finally, in 2020, Garriott confirmed it to the Times of London. He said the ashes were still up there, sealed under the floor. No ceremony, no plaque. Just a quiet tribute to a man who spent his life dreaming of the stars. His family had tried several times to get approval for a full orbital burial. Most requests were denied or delayed. They finally managed to get 2 small missions off the ground, one in 2007 and another in 2012, but neither stayed in orbit long. Only Garriott's secret mission made it permanent. There's no official record in NASA's database listing Doohan's remains. The agency likely turned a blind eye. It wasn't a risk, just a gesture, one that Star Trek fans still talk about. Today, visitors to the International Space Station have no idea they're floating above Earth with part of Scotty on board. There's no marker, no announcement, no sign, but he's there. Hunter S. Thompson's Cannon send-off. He didn't want a grave. He wanted a show. When he died in 2005, he left instructions for a send-off that was loud, strange, and unforgettable. And his friend Johnny Depp made sure it happened. Thompson had written for years about his ideal funeral. He wanted his ashes fired from a giant cannon shaped like a fist with fireworks blasting overhead. It wasn't just a joke. He described it in detail, location, shape, even the music. So when the time came, Depp paid over $3 million to make it real. The cannon was built in Colorado on Thompson's Owl Farm property. It stood 153 feet tall and was topped with the Gonzo Fist logo, 2 thumbs gripping a peyote button. Friends, family, and celebrities flew in for the event. Jack Nicholson was there, so was Bill Murray. Security kept it private, but the photos leaked later. The ceremony didn't follow tradition. There were drinks, speeches, and rock music. Then, as night fell, the cannon fired. Thompson's ashes exploded into the sky with a massive burst of fireworks. The crowd cheered. Some cried. Some just stood there, stunned. It wasn't held in a church or a funeral home. It wasn't about peace or closure. It was pure chaos, just how he liked it. The idea of blasting cremains into the sky was rare at the time. Now, it's a service you can buy. But Thompson's was the original spectacle. It wasn't about following a trend. It was about flipping the entire funeral tradition on its head. Even his neighbors weren't surprised. They'd known him for years. This was exactly the kind of exit they expected. Loud, strange, and final. Thompson's ashes didn't land in a cemetery. There's no marker to visit. His grave is the sky above Woody Creek. That's where he made his exit. Some people write wills. Thompson wrote a finale. No sermons, no graveside silence. Just a cannon, a fireball, and a writer who left the way he lived, fast, loud, and without apology. Elizabeth Taylor's fashionably late funeral. When she passed away in 2011, she made one final demand: show up to her funeral 15 minutes late. The detail wasn't accidental. Taylor had it written into her plans. She wanted to arrive late to her own funeral, just as she had to so many movie premieres and red carpets. And the people organizing it followed through. Her service took place at Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Glendale, California. That's the same cemetery where Walt Disney, Michael Jackson, and Clark Gable are buried. The ceremony was private, attended by close friends and family only. Paparazzi were kept far from the gates. She arrived in a custom Rolls-Royce hearse covered in flowers. When the service was set to begin, organizers delayed the start by exactly 15 minutes. No explanation was given to guests. Then the car pulled in. Taylor's casket was closed. She had converted to Judaism in the 1950s, and her funeral followed Jewish traditions. That meant no open viewing, no lengthy speeches, just prayers, songs, and a quiet farewell. Her burial site is simple and clean. No towering monument, no giant statue. Just a white marble ledger stone with her name and dates. The only inscription, in loving memory. For someone who'd lived in the spotlight for over 60 years, the low-key funeral surprised a lot of people. But the planned delay, that was all Elizabeth. She'd spent her life on her terms, fighting studio contracts, marrying who she wanted, surviving illness, and raising millions for HIV/AIDS awareness when few dared to talk about it. Being 15 minutes late wasn't just a nod to habit, it was a final wink. Even in death, Taylor made sure she wasn't just remembered, she was noticed. No drama, no headline stunt, just one perfectly timed moment that made everyone there smile and say, "That's so, Liz." She didn't want a performance, she just wanted the final entrance to feel like her. And it did. Quiet, elegant, and just a little bit late. David Bowie's Secret Sea Burial. He didn't want a funeral. No crowd, no speeches, no final curtain call. When he died in January 2016, he left strict instructions. Keep it private, quiet, and off the radar. His body was cremated shortly after death in New Jersey. There was no viewing, no public notice. Not even his closest friends were invited. The decision shocked many, but it was exactly what Bowie had planned. His ashes weren't kept in an urn or placed in a family plot. Instead, they were scattered in Bali during a private Buddhist ceremony. The details weren't revealed right away. Months later, the family confirmed the location but didn't release photos or dates. No shrine, no marker, just the ocean. He had studied Buddhism in his youth and remained drawn to its ideas. The sea burial matched his wish for a peaceful, spiritual exit. He didn't want attention, he wanted release. Even in life, Bowie avoided labels. He changed identities constantly. Ziggy Stardust, the Thin White Duke, Aladdin Sane. So it made sense that in death, he didn't want one fixed place for fans to visit. He didn't want to become a statue or a memorial stop. He just wanted to go. His family honored every part of his plan. No funeral announcement was made until after it happened. Friends and collaborators only found out after the fact. Some were hurt, but most understood. He had fought cancer privately for 18 months and didn't want to make his final days a public story. There's no gravestone with his name on it. No memorial concert was held at the time. Just silence, followed by a slow wave of tributes from fans across the world. And still, no one knows the exact beach, the exact hour, or who was there when his ashes were released. That was the point. It wasn't for the cameras, it was for him. David Bowie exited the stage without a spotlight, no encore, no crowd noise, just a quiet ending, somewhere far away, with the sound of waves instead of applause. That's how he wanted it. And that's exactly what he got. Carrie Fisher's Prozac urn. She never did anything the normal way. So, when it came to her funeral, her final resting place had a twist. Half her ashes were buried beside her mother, Debbie Reynolds. The other half, they were placed inside a giant ceramic Prozac pill. The urn wasn't planned in advance. Her daughter, Billie Lourd, picked it after seeing it in Carrie's home. It was one of her favorite possessions, a huge green and white pill capsule labeled Prozac. It had sat in the corner for years like a weird piece of pop art. Billie later said, she loved it. It was her favorite thing. That made the choice easy. Carrie died from cardiac arrest aboard a flight from London to Los Angeles. She passed away in the hospital 4 days later. Her mother died the very next day from a stroke. The double tragedy shook Hollywood. Their memorial was held at Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Los Angeles. Friends like Meryl Streep, Mark Hamill, and Billie Lourd gave private tributes. The The family kept the service small. Carrie's humor, though, stayed front and center. The urn became the unexpected star. Photos surfaced of the Prozac capsule being carried gently through the cemetery. Some fans thought it was a joke. It wasn't. That was really her. Carrie had always been open about her mental health. She talked about bipolar disorder long before it was common in public spaces. She made jokes about it on talk shows, turned it into writing material, and made people laugh while she explained what living with it meant. The urn wasn't a gimmick. It was the final punchline to a life full of honesty, struggle, and dark humor. There's no statue or mausoleum, just a quiet grave shared with her mother and a quirky, very Carrie keepsake that made people smile through tears. It didn't follow any rule of funeral tradition, but that was Carrie Fisher, actress, writer, and unapologetically herself, even in the end. Her fans still bring flowers, lightsabers, and even plastic pill toys to her grave. Not out of disrespect, but because they know she would have laughed and maybe rolled her eyes.